Matthew chapter 24, starting in verse 15. So when you see the abomination of desolation, remember we just talked about that in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. We know from Daniel chapter 9 it comes at the midpoint of the tribulation, in the middle of the 7 years. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Is Jesus saying, oh, just hold on for a moment, I'm about to come get you? No, he says, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. And before I go on, actually, right there, God willing, and I believe God is calling my wife to do this, God willing, my wife and I are going to be there, right there, when this happens. God willing, if God makes it possible, and I believe he's calling us to be there. Let me go on. Let him who is on the housetop now go down to take anything out of his house. Let him who is in the field not return to take his clothes. Woe to those who are with child and to those who nurse in those days. Pray that your escape will not be in the winter or on the Sabbath, for then will be great tribulation. Take note of that word. I'm going to come back to that in a second. For then will be great tribulation, such as not happened since the beginning of the world until now, no, nor ever shall be. So this abomination of desolation begins a period of time, which Jesus says, for then shall be great tribulation, like the world has never seen. Now, skip down to verse 29. He's still taught on the same thing. Jesus says, immediately after the tribulation of those days. If you look in the Greek, the word for tribulation is the exact same Greek word. Now, is Jesus trying to trick us? Is the Word of God trying to trick us? No, he's referring exactly back to the word tribulation that he referred to just a few verses earlier, where he said at this point, this period of great tribulation, Greek word, and when I come back, I'll actually pronounce it for you. It's kind of difficult to pronounce. But then in verse 29, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the days that he's just referring to, the sun will be dark and the moon shall not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they'll see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather. We just read in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 about gathering his elect from the four winds from one end of the heaven to the other. So the Bible is very clear. You know, it's not trying to confuse us. It's not trying to trick us. Jesus laid it all out there, and yet we won't see because we've been deceived. We've been taught another way. We've read a zillion books. We've seen countless hours of these prophecy teachers teaching us one way, and we think, how in the world can they possibly be wrong? So you get into the discussions with people. They won't have an intellectual debate with you because they have such an emotional tie to this doctrine. There's very few doctrines in the entire Christian church where believers have such an emotional reaction, an emotional tie. For many pre-tribbers, it's almost as central to them as salvation is. It's central to their faith. And so when it doesn't happen, things start going crazy. A lot of people, they're not only going to get very, very angry at their ministers, but they're going to start questioning their faith. Zach and I were talking about this last night. People are going to question their faith when this doesn't happen because it's been so drilled into them. Yeah. But the Word of God says exactly the opposite.